better daily, where we work hard in our minds, bodies, and our spirits to become 1% better every single day. Download the app and join our Betterment family at betterdaily.life to catch the video version of these podcasts. Here's your host and my dad, Alex Van Houten.
What is up, Betterment family? This is Alex Van Houten in Better Daily Live. Happy Wednesday. It's Wild Wednesday, which means you never know what's going to happen. And today we're going to be talking about blood work, cholesterol, blood sugar, and triglycerides. And I'm very excited to share this with you. Before I get there, it is day 33 of the Faithful 40 Challenge. We have exactly 7.5 days to finish out this challenge strong. Some of you have stuck with this like straight up bosses, and I'm so proud of you. And some of you are watching me right now and going, oh man, hey, let's finish strong. Get rid of the shame and the guilt. Let's finish strong. Let's get on that mindset. Let's get on that nutrition. Let's get on that exercise. 1 week is still enough time to make a difference. In fact, the whole ethos, what we do around here, is 1% better every day because we wake up at a new opportunity to find something inside of ourselves that wasn't there before and bring it out. 1% better every day. Get on it. Keep up the good work. So today's conversation actually comes out of one of my original interviews from Divining Dad Bod almost 4 years ago, which is just crazy to say. Episode 22 of Defining Dad Bod, I had the opportunity to talk to the one and the only Dr. Adrian Chavez, and he and I talked through the misconceptions and misunderstandings around different blood values. Now, it's not medical advice. However, what I find very often is that most individuals, when they get their blood work done, if you do it yearly, we don't really know what those numbers mean. We're just hoping to get a good report, right? And so what Dr. Chavez and I do walking through this is we try to shed some light on what does it mean for our cholesterol to be 200? What does it mean for our blood glucose to be 101? What does it mean for our triglycerides to be 125? Why are those measures and markers valuable and important? And what can we do to shift and alter those from our own day-to-day perspective, right? Because there might be some of you who, from a genetic perspective, need some medical support in order to keep your cholesterol from becoming a huge problem for you, later in life, causing cardiovascular disease and whatnot. And there might be some of you who, from a genetic perspective, have had to get some help with your blood glucose, right? But that said, there are lifestyle factors that affect and influence these markers significantly. And so being educated about what those markers mean, what you can do about those things, and whether or not it might be a problem for you is really important. I find this very, very often in my practice where, let's say somebody comes to me and their blood glucose is 110. And if you don't know, normal blood glucose should be 100 or below in a fasted state. In fact, for every point your glucose is above 85 in a fasted state, the more likely you are to develop insulin resistance. For every point, it's something like 80% higher likelihood of developing insulin resistance, which leads to fat gain, which leads to more insulin resistance, which leads to difficulty regulating sugar and carbohydrates. And so it's really bad for your body composition, but it's also really bad for your health, right? So anyway, that said, your normal blood glucose should be below 100. But let's say you get your blood work done and the doctor says, oh wow, your blood glucose is 110. That's a little high. We need to watch that. And you're like, okay. So we're just going to watch this thing. See you next year. And next year, your blood glucose is 121. And he's like, whoa. Like, that's not good at all. If it keeps getting higher, we're going to have to put you on a medication in order to drop that. And you're like, okay, well, what do I need to do, doc? And he'll say, hey, lose some weight, right? Well, that's hard because there's a lot of things around blood glucose that make a difference. For instance, if you ride hot on your blood glucose, one of the things you can do is start counting your sugar that you consume every day. Blood glucose tends to rise, fasted blood sugar tends to rise if we're really bad at processing carbohydrates. And one of the ways we get bad at processing carbohydrates is constantly packing simple carbohydrates into our body. And so our body has a really hard time getting the blood glucose down, right? So counting your sugar in a day and reducing the amount of sugar that you eat is significant in the process of lowering your blood sugar. Good morning, Scott. Good to see you. He says, all my markers are finally healthy. My cholesterol started at 297 and now it's 179. Whoa, that's amazing. That's awesome. Great work on your health journey, brother. That's so awesome to hear. We'll talk about cholesterol in a second. So blood glucose is an example of that. You could make a difference by just counting your sugars. Maybe having a fasting practice 1 day a week where you do an 18, maybe 24, if you're feeling really froggy, 36-hour fast can help to reduce that blood sugar significantly, teach your body to burn fat as a fuel source, and actually start to lower that blood sugar overall. And lastly, what about a cardiovascular practice? Studies have repeatedly shown that 30 minutes, 4 days a week of cardiovascular exercise will lower blood sugars, will lower fasting blood sugars. Now, why is this important? Because if your blood sugar gets really high, what happens is sugar in your bloodstream will attack tissues in the body, causing damage from the inside out, right? And so the reason it's important from a medical perspective to keep your blood sugar low is just to keep you from damaging yourself from the inside out. It also taxes your pancreas, which is what leads to type 2 diabetes. When your blood sugar stays high all the time, you're constantly asking your pancreas to exude insulin in order to keep your blood sugar in check. And so eventually your pancreas goes, look, man, this is way more work than I'm supposed to be doing on a regular basis. I'm out. Peace. And that's type 2 diabetes. You don't want that. It's not good. And so all that to say, what Dr. Chavez and I do is we talk through the blood values that many people are getting tested on a yearly basis. And we talk through what lifestyle factors can impact and influence those. Because if I'm a patient and I go to the doctor and my blood sugar comes back 110, my doctor really cares about me and he knows his stuff. My doctor really cares about me and really knows his stuff. He's going to sit down with me and go, look, here are 3 things you can do to change this today. We're going to lower your blood sugar by consuming less sugar every day. If you don't do that, we're going to have to put you on a medication that you don't want to be on in order to support you. 2, you need to implement a cardiovascular practice 3 days a week, 30 minutes. You can walk briskly up hills. You can go to the gym. You can start swimming. I don't care what you do, but it needs to happen, or you're going to be on a medication you don't want to be on. 3, you guys see where I'm going with this, right? And the poor doctor, he only gets to see you once a year for this sort of thing. So, people will say that doctors are really quick to prescribe medications rather than dealing with the root of the problem. But if I only had 10 minutes with you once a year, that's about the best I could do for you too. So listen to this conversation. I hope you find it really helpful. I hope it generates some questions, and I'd be really happy to help you. Again, this is not medical advice necessarily. The goal, well, it's not at all. I'm not a doctor. Dr. Adrian Chavez has his PhD, not his MD. And so we're talking about this from a scientific perspective as nutrition practitioners. At the same time, being an informed patient is probably one of the most powerful things you can be, medically speaking. So I hope you find this conversation helpful. Thank you for joining me for Wild Wednesday. Tomorrow is Word Thursday, my favorite day of the week. And until then, it's just 1%. You got this. Hello and welcome to Defining Dad Bod. This is Alex Van Houten, your host. Hope you guys are doing well. Joined today with a very important and very influential person in the nutrition and fitness world, Dr. Adrian Chavez. He would say he's not that important, but he's a humble kind of dude. So you can connect with him on Instagram at Dr. Adrian Chavez. He's also got a fantastic Monday through Friday podcast daily called Your Nutrition Prescription. Great information on there. And then you can also catch up to him on his website, dradrianchavez.com. That's DradrianChavez.com. Dr. Chavez, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you having me on here and giving me that great introduction there.
Right? Air high five, man. I've followed your work for a bit on various dad groups that I'm a part of on Facebook, and you just always speak with a complimentary and positive way of doing things, and you're also extremely professional and knowledgeable about what you do. So I appreciate your energy and for you bringing that onto the show, man. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it.
So I've got a bone to pick with you before we actually get into our show. So we're going to talk about being your most important healthcare provider and whatnot. But so
I saw recently you've got a 4-year-old named Jace. Is that right? Your son?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I'm following you guys on Instagram right now, and I saw a post that said 6-packs are overrated in giant bold font. And as a proud owner, as a proud owner of a 6-pack and a person who generally tries to help people garner that for themselves, I was like, whoa, that really struck me. So I thought about it for a while, and I'm sure you have a fantastic reason for saying that in your practice and also with the people that you've worked with. And I hope you'd expand on that for me, because I was struck back. I was like, whoa, 6-packs are overrated. Let me look at mine real quick. I don't know. It feels pretty good to have one. So can you help me understand where you're coming from with that?
Yeah, no, so I completely agree with you. I mean, I have a 6-pack most of the year. There are times where I fall off and my nutrition's not 90% in, and it kind of goes away. But most of the year, I have, a visible 6-pack. But the reason that I say that is because from a health perspective, really having a 6-pack or like getting your body fat down to a percentage where your 6-pack is going to be very visible, there's not really much of a benefit over someone who's having 12-14% body fat as a man. And there could be actually some negative health effects of really trying to push your body to a very low body fat percentage, especially if you are you're not that ectomorph or mesomorph body type or endomorph body type that is able to maintain a low level of body fat. Some people are they're bigger types of people, and they have sometimes I see where people are putting a huge emphasis on trying to get their body fat down to a certain level, have a 6-pack and be very lean, but sometimes that could actually be harmful as opposed to actually beneficial to health.
I appreciate the way you put that, because I got off the phone with a young woman recently who was prepping for a physique competition, and she's one of those endomorph, a little larger build type of people, naturally a little higher body fat percentage, harder to get that subcutaneous fat down. And her quote trainer, I'm not even really sure who she was working with, had her like on 1,200 calories a day doing fasted cardio and working out 3 hours a day, and she performed for her show and dealt well, but now a year later she's still dealing with the hormonal impact of that, because let's face it, you just can't do that to your body in a healthy way, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is more so the case for women. It's just harder for a woman to maintain that low of a body fat percentage. Body fat has a function in the body. It's not just a benign tissue that's sitting there. It has hormonal function. So when you push it so low, you can actually cause imbalances like you just mentioned.
Yeah, like you can also reduce bone density, right? And hell, I'm looking out. I'm in Colorado right now, and we've got snow falling outside. Isn't it supposed to keep us warm? Isn't that what the holidays are all about?
That's why I gain a little bit of body fat during the wintertime.
Yeah, I'm going to blame it on that. I like the pumpkin pie, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it's definitely family things.
So let's dive into one of the things that really drive you from the core of you. You have the idea of being your own most important healthcare provider. And when I was like, hey, Adrian, what would you like to chat with on the show? You said, I'd really like to talk to people about being their most important healthcare provider. And it really made me think of, anyway, the old Greek classical physician Hippocrates, his saying that let food be thy medicine. I'm sure most people have heard that. You've morphed that a little bit on your website to say food can either be your safest medicine or your slowest poison. And I'm sure you have some influences behind that as well. So can you help me understand and help my listeners understand where you're coming from with regard to being your most important healthcare provider? And I'm sure nutrition's a big part of that.
Oh yeah, I think nutrition is the most important part of that. But from the perspective in our country, just what people are dealing with through healthcare right now is we're not getting something that is actually reversing disease from a healthcare perspective. It's not managing chronic disease very well. We are experiencing increases in a lot of health conditions as we increase technology and actually come up with better healthcare. So what's happening from the healthcare system perspective is not serving us. And many people were kind of trained to rely on our healthcare provider, on our doctor, to tell us what we need to do to stay well. And I just want people to really shift that thought process a large amount to really understand that what your health turns out to be is almost 100% dependent on your activities on a day-to-day basis. Now, your genetics are very important, but your genetics are information. So that gives you baseline information of what your susceptibilities are. But how those genetics express themselves, how your body actually turns out, whether or not you develop heart disease or cancer, autoimmune disease, or type 2 diabetes, is going to be dependent upon the things that you do, the food that you eat, probably most importantly, whether or not you move, your chemical exposures, the medications that you take, also very, very important. So, really relying on a healthcare provider and not taking control of your health is going to put you in a very vulnerable position with your health.
Well, yeah, and that's the idea of ownership, right? Like if we own ourselves and if we're an agent in our own healthcare process, then many of the things that currently people depend on other people as a subject to deal with for them, many of those things start to go away, right? So for instance, like blood pressure, you just put out a show about how there are a lot of different natural ways, both nutrition and non-nutrition, to lower one's blood pressure or to keep yourself from being one of the people who have to be treated for high blood pressure. And if you're an agent in that, then you're not susceptible to the things, like you're not all of a sudden, oh no, I have high blood pressure, somebody fix it for me. But instead you have the ability to change that. Can you walk through some of those things for me that we can do to not be the high blood pressure people?
So with any disease, you really have to look at what might have caused that disease. So blood pressure. There's several different things that could lead to higher blood pressure. So a hardening of your arteries or just stiffness of your arteries, vasoconstriction. So I'm sure you've talked about that multiple times on the podcast with relation to exercise, but just a constant vasoconstriction would cause an increase in blood pressure. Increase in blood volume would increase blood pressure. Some of these, we have to look at the why, and that's going to be dependent on the individual person. Now, some general recommendations that have been clinically proven, that have been shown in research studies to improve blood pressure. Garlic in a supplemental form, about 900 milligrams per day, has shown consistently in clinical research trials to actually reduce blood pressure. Flaxseed, there's a little bit less research on it, but the effect is pretty substantial. About 4 tablespoons per day of flaxseed in people with high blood pressure. There was significant reductions, and like I said, there's less research on that than there is on garlic, but the effect was pretty substantial. So I always recommend flaxseed as well when it comes to reducing blood pressure. Everyone knows about reducing sodium, increasing potassium. Those are going to be critical in order to balance the electrolytes in the blood and make sure that there's not too much water retention to keep blood pressure managed. So those are some of the main, most important places to reduce blood pressure. But meditation, breathing, really calming down the mind, because a lot of it is just sympathetic nervous system activation. We're in the flight or fight system all day, and that's why the blood pressure is high. It's not necessarily, sometimes it's more so about that than what you're eating. So, when you said earlier, I really do believe that food is medicine, but I just believe that lifestyle medicine altogether. So food, sleep, the way that we are thinking, our relationships, everything plays into it. Food is very important, but we also have to consider these other factors, and that's what I do with my work. So I do consultations with individual clients, and we're looking at everything. We're looking at as many blood tests as we can. We're looking at urine tests of gut function, and really trying to come up with a comprehensive picture of what might help them start moving towards better health.
And with regard to like lifestyle, nutrition, and exercise, those things all working together as a unit to bring about good, positive, not only just health changes, but also prolonged things that are going to last you a long time in life. You also mentioned there's a genetic component to things. And I for our listeners' purposes, I like to think of it as if I know I have a family history of stuff and I've also started to develop those things in myself, it's not like, well, you're genetically predisposed to this thing, and so it's deterministic. You're going to be on blood pressure medication the rest of your life, blah, blah, blah. Genetics, the idea, I like to picture like a big minefield. If somebody could come by the minefield of your life and put big red flags all over the ground, it's not like you go, oh, well, I'm really screwed, I'm going to jump on one of them. You would be a lot more careful about how you kind of walk through that field, so to speak. So if you're listening to this and you have a genetic predisposition toward high blood pressure, maybe it runs in your family, or maybe you've started to cultivate that in yourself, maybe lifestyle and nutrition that wasn't conducive to a lower blood pressure, you're not screwed. You can do what Dr. Adrian Chavez just said and knock those things out and see if that makes a benefit for you. And if you feel like you need some help navigating that, like he said, he connects with clients regularly for consultations of that sort. So thanks for sharing that. What about cholesterol? I know that's something I get a lot of questions about with regard to not just defining dad bod, but also with regard to clients that I work with off of the podcast as well. Cholesterol is a really big question in people's mind, and it's very commonly misunderstood. What thoughts do you have around helping my listeners support their cholesterol positively?
So this is an important issue where it's really important to be your own healthcare provider, because when you go to the doctor and you get a lipid panel, you're going to have LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, and total cholesterol. That's going to give you a little bit of information, but that is really insufficient. Those markers are outdated. We know a lot more about cholesterol today than we did when we first started measuring HDL and LDL and total cholesterol. So we can do some advanced testing first. That's usually what I try to do with some of my clients. When someone comes to me, I try to get them to see if they can get some advanced testing from their doctor covered by insurance. If not, you can send all this stuff off online. I use a company called Life Extension, and I'm serious about like being your own healthcare provider. You can do a lot of your own testing online because doctors sometimes aren't going to be cooperative with things they've never heard of, and it's unfortunate that they haven't heard of them because the research is there to show that something like ApoB, for instance, so that is a protein that is on LDL cholesterol, and it tells us how many particles of LDL cholesterol we have floating around in our blood. It's more important than LDL concentration. So having a lot of small particles is what can lead to the development of heart disease, not necessarily the total concentration of LDL. I've had clients go to their doctors and ask them to get ApoB measured, and the doctor doesn't even know what it is. And these papers came out 14, 15 years ago. It's just the how slow that practice actually evolves in healthcare. You know, if you're a doctor and you graduated in 85, let's say, and you've been practicing, and no offense to anyone who's in that position, but you know, if you have been practicing for 30 years and you're not up to date with the newest markers for cardiovascular disease, you're going to be doing your patient a disservice. And that's what I see a lot of times. So that was a little bit of a rant about being your own healthcare provider. I am a huge proponent of that. I talk about that a lot on my podcast about how to do advanced measures for different things, how to test gut function, how to test microbiome and parasites and candida infections, because these things are not being tested by your conventional healthcare provider.
And that's extremely important because, you're about to give a few quick snapshots as to how somebody can positively improve their cholesterol. But the point that you're making is something I talked about recently with regard to body composition, how weight and BMI is an insufficient measure of progress for body composition with regard to fitness goals, and how there are a lot deeper measures we can take now. And thanks to technology, thanks to wonderful apps that we have now, thanks to the internet and the age of information where you can really have so many different things at your fingertips, you can take ownership of that and dig a lot deeper than we used to be able to 30 or 40 years ago. So you're saying the exact same thing with regard to cholesterol, is that the thing that your insurance company covers you to get tested every single year, they might red flag some of those things or might not red flag some of those things, but there are a lot deeper measures that you could take to find out, hey, am I doing well, or does something need to change to help me prevent poorer things in the future? If I summarize that right.
Most definitely. So that's exactly in if someone has high cholesterol, so clinically defined high cholesterol, over 200 milligrams per deciliter for their cholesterol. I have clients that come to me that said they had 220 and then they got put on a statin, and their LDL cholesterol wasn't even that high, and they're probably not at very high risk if we looked at their ApoB level because they're eating a decently healthy diet. So the measures right now are just insufficient to really give a good cardiovascular risk profile. It's an indication, but the technology has gotten to a place. I mean, look at your phone in the last 15 years. Like we're getting better at measuring the human body, and clinical practice isn't really keeping up with that. So you can keep up with that by learning a little bit about it and actually doing your own measures at home if you want to, and really getting some in-depth measures. So I had a client who on Friday texted me. He's off of his cholesterol and blood pressure medication pills. Like, it's not that hard to do if you're consistent with your nutrition. It was 4 months for him to get off of both of those pills, and it was just being smart about his nutrition and adding in a couple of these supplements that I'm talking about as well. And I think nutritional supplements can be very useful. Like, for example, garlic that I mentioned a second ago also helps to reduce LDL cholesterol. So if you have high blood pressure and high cholesterol, there's no reason you shouldn't be taking a garlic pill every day. It's about 50, 60 cents per day. It's going to reduce LDL cholesterol. There's multiple clinical trials that have shown that. So they've tested it just like they've tested a drug, where they've done randomized, placebo-controlled clinical trials and show that garlic reduces LDL cholesterol. Now, it doesn't reduce LDL cholesterol 30%, but your diet will. And your diet will actually, if you switch over, and I know this is against the norm right now, but switching over to a more lower fat diet is probably going to be the best way to reduce cholesterol significantly. Now, I'm not a big fan of adding in a bunch of refined grains when you reduce the fat content, and I think that's a mistake that some people make, and that doesn't have a positive effect on cholesterol levels. But if you reduce the kinds of fat that you're eating and keep fat a little bit managed, mostly plant-based fats, lower amounts of saturated fat, because in people who are susceptible to get high cholesterol, they have an ApoB genetic mutation, many of them, and I'm one of them as well. It's about 30% of the population where they have this mutation in an ApoE gene. It's called a 4 allele, where it will cause them to retain more or be at a higher risk for heart disease if they're eating high amounts of saturated fat. So it works for some people, but it doesn't work for everyone. So in that regard, if you have high cholesterol, I'd usually recommend a lower saturated fat diet, higher fiber, because fiber binds to cholesterol and bioacids in the digestive tract and helps to eliminate them from the body. So fiber can be very, very useful there. Sometimes I'll use like some supplemental fiber along with a very high fiber diet. So beans can be very useful for helping to reduce cholesterol as well. And then exercise, of course, is very useful, but I wanted to focus more on nutrition and the supplements.
Oh, yeah, of course. So we talk about nutrition all the time here, and we talk about exercise all the time, and us exercise junkies could probably use a little schooling in the nutrition world, right?
Yeah, no, I'm an exercise junkie myself, but then I got obsessed with nutrition. I have a master's degree in exercise science. I got so obsessed with nutrition. I
saw that in your history. I find a lot of times, especially in the personal training world, when I'm working with personal trainers, everybody's nutrition philosophy starts with, I exercise so I can eat whatever I want, and then we mature from there. That's like the kindergarten version.
Yeah. For me, it was like, I thought it was cool changing my body. I was like, wow, this is cool. Like, I can change the way that my body looks and functions, and I just got obsessed with it from there.
Yeah, you're like Michelangelo and your body's the Sistine Chapel. I love that. So let's talk about blood glucose. This is the other, in my mind, the third marker that people hear a lot about from their doctor, and they'll get elevated blood glucose or elevated A1C. And so the doctor will say, hey, we red flag it. We'll watch it for a little while. If the doctor's well-versed, they might give you a little nutrition advice. But really, it's kind of like, hey, let's wait till you're diabetic before we start dealing with this issue. And I get a lot of guys who ask me, hey, I was red flagged at 101 or I'm 119. What do I do? That kind of stuff. So what are your thoughts around helping to lower blood glucose and the A1C, which is that 3-month marker down the road?
So I actually did a series of this on my podcast, and I researched this a lot during my PhD. This was kind of my focus, is diabetes. And you really, there's so many different ways to go about it, but in general, you just have to get consistent. If you're inconsistent and you're developing type 2 diabetes, you need to get on a consistent nutrition plan. As long as that's creating a caloric deficit, you're going to get a benefit from it. Now, there's ways to improve it beyond that, but if you're not creating a caloric deficit right now, and that is the first step that you need to take in order to, keep moving towards fixing that, especially if you have type 2 diabetes. You have a couple of steps to take if you've already developed a disease. But the first thing that I would say is just get very consistent with nutrition, exercise. Don't worry too much about exactly like what you're eating. Just make sure that calorie-wise you're creating a caloric deficit so that you can help lose weight. Now, if you're not overweight, that could be a completely different topic, but you want to get, in general, most people who have type 2 diabetes are going to be a little bit overweight. That caloric deficit is what's going to drive improvements in blood sugar control. Now, you also obviously want to avoid all of the things that are going to cause your blood sugar to spike and rebound, which is basically all processed carbohydrates. So, all the cereals and candies and all of that, if you look on the back, there's a lot of carbs, a lot of sugar. you want to avoid that stuff. In general, I think I always talk with the thought process or the assumption that everyone understands that, like, you just have to eat whole foods. Okay, like when it comes to healthy nutrition, most of your food just has to not come from a box. And even, the Quest bars and the other types of things, like that's still a processed food. So anything that is a whole food, as long as you're eating that type of diet and maintaining that caloric deficit, you'll be on the right track. Now, there's some other things that can be very helpful. High-intensity interval training. I'm sure you've talked about that before, but that preferentially uses glucose for fuel and improves insulin sensitivity and glucose control to a greater degree than slower aerobic training. So that's a really good one. Resistance training a couple times a week is very beneficial for improving glucose control. Reducing carbohydrates for a short period of time. Now, you don't have to go keto forever or anything like that, but reducing them for a short period of time can also be very helpful to help you to learn how to use fat for fuel better and become more metabolically flexible. So there's this term called metabolic flexibility that have you talked about that before on the show, Alex?
I haven't, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the idea that basically human beings evolved to be able to metabolize just about anything. But if we go for a long time in our lives eating only particular kinds of foods, then we start to lose the ability to deal with fats, fibers, things like that in order to run efficiently off of. And the overall net effect is if you have lower metabolic flexibility, then it's a recipe for accumulating fats, for pissing off your hormone system, and all around not feeling as energetic as you could. Is that about the size of it?
Yeah, that's the response of it. Metabolic flexibility is basically your body's ability to start using fat more so as a predominant fuel source. So let's say you had a meal with carbs, your blood glucose goes up, your body will start to use more sugar for fuel. As your blood glucose starts to go down, your body needs to be able to switch over and start basically replacing the reduction in sugar in the blood with oxidation of fat. So being able to switch over a couple of hours after your meal is very important. People who are type 2 diabetic, they have very poor metabolic flexibility. There's been studies that have shown that a couple of hours after the meal, they get super hungry because they can't switch over to fat for fuel. So one couple of good ways to train that is going low carb for a short period of time. Fasting is also very useful as well, but I don't think that these approaches are necessary from the start. If someone's just on step one, I think step one is to get on something consistent, and then after that we can start incorporating fasting, or you can start incorporating carbohydrate restriction to further enhance metabolism. And it's not something that you have to do forever, but it does help to improve the metabolism by pulling sugar out of the diet completely for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and pulling out most carbohydrates. You're forcing the body to rely on fat for fuel, and that's something that is impaired in people who have type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. So doing that for a short period of time can be very, very effective for helping to improve blood glucose control.
And not to mention, when you've been consuming a lot of processed carbohydrates for a while, if you cut all that out for about 2 weeks, you'll feel like garbage for 3 or 4 days probably. And then after that, as your body transitions over, there are very few things in the nutrition world, or at least per my understanding, that can give you immediate results and is good for you at the same time, which is pretty important. But that you will see a huge drop in your water weight. You'll start to see a reduction in your body fat, and you'll even see an increase in the consistency of your energy, or at least that's been my experience with clients. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. And I have a 7-day reset that I run every once in a while, and it's not pulling out all carbohydrates, but it's just going on a reduced calorie diet under nutrition, under like a low calorie diet, but you're also still providing a lot of nutrition. So everything is just very nutritious, and that can be a good way to go about it as well. So you're not lacking the micronutrients, but you're still able to get those quick results. Because there was a study, it was done at NYU, that looked at type 2 diabetics, and they compared one group who actually got bariatric surgery and another group who didn't. And they put the other group who didn't on a 500 calorie diet per day. So that was the post-bariatric surgery diet. They wanted to see if the group that went on the diet had the same outcomes as the group that actually got bariatric surgery. And they showed that after 21 days, their insulin resistance, their type 2 diabetes, was almost completely reversed off of this 500 calorie diet in both groups. in the bariatric surgery was no better than the people who didn't get surgery, because there's a lot of people who argue that the surgery was like, there's a benefit from a gut hormone perspective, and it's not necessarily the reduced calorie diet. So that was the point of this study, was to show that the reduced calorie diet is just as effective.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, no offense to anybody who's gotten their stomach shrunk on them, but yeah, there's quite a lot of money in pushing forward that as a fix. So that being said, Doctor, I would like to, we have a few other questions I'm going to ask you for supporters only about superfoods and nutrition myths and stuff, but I just want to say thanks so much for all that information. I know it's going to help somebody listening. Do you have any last words for us before I let you get about making your day awesome?
Man, so the take-home message that I always want to really put out there is, just don't rely on your standard conventional healthcare provider. You can find, if they're not working with you to help you optimize your health, find someone else. Find a good healthcare provider that is going to help you run all the lab tests that you want to make sure that you're well, to actually look ahead and say, okay, do we see your testosterone levels moving in the wrong direction? We can talk about that before medication, and that doesn't just turn to medication first. Now, I know that's hard to find, and that's why it's important to educate yourself. I run a DADS-based training program. It's a 16-week training program that we just started a couple of weeks ago, and the goal is to really help the dads kind of become that ambassador in their home, because I mean, the clients that I talk to on a regular basis, they're people who have just been completely, their health has been really destroyed by healthcare, essentially. Like they had some type of gut-based issue and they got put on antibiotics. They didn't change their diet, didn't get any probiotic supplements. It got worse. They developed an autoimmune disease. They got put on all sorts of different stimulants and relaxants, and they're on 6 or 7 medications when they come to me because they're looking for some type of solution. And I want to help people avoid that. I know it happens more so in women as far as like the autoimmune disease goes, but men are dealing with low testosterone. Men are dealing with all sorts of different health issues as well. Heart disease are at higher rates. And we should be informed enough and knowledgeable enough to be able to really understand what we need to know to work with our healthcare provider and do what we need to do in our daily lives to be able to avoid those issues. And that's one of my main objectives, is try to help educate people to be able to do that and just spread that message as much as I can.
Well said, man. Thank you so much for joining us and for giving some of your wisdom. Again, guys, this is Dr. Adrian Chavez. You can find him on Instagram at Dr. Adrian Chavez, or you can find him on his podcast, Your Nutrition Prescription, and his website, www.dradrianchavez.com. Thanks so much, man, for joining us.
You're welcome. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you for joining us for 1% Better today. Don't forget to subscribe for the podcast. Leave us a raving review to tell others how Better Daily has helped you in your journey. If you want more Better Daily, download our app and join our Betterment family at betterdaily.live. Use code POD to get 25% off your subscription. That's POD, all caps, to save 25% on your subscription. We all have a cross to carry. It's lighter when we do it together. Go to betterdaily.live today.